let's talk about then what happens next after the call to adventure, and that's the entrance into the other world. Because I was wrestling with this back and forth, trying to understand what this meant in the context of both the hero's journey and the heroine's labyrinth. That when you leave your everyday life after Act One, and then you go into the other world or the underworld, or however you want to phrase it, but you're entering a different world after that, where a lot of the Act Two story is going to be taking place. Doug is big on with the heroine's labyrinth between making a distinction between like a heroine who is going to deal with some other part of her own culture, whereas a hero often goes outside of that. And I'm wondering, how do we distinguish what it means for something to be your culture? And by that, for instance, I mean, I could set up a Act One story where somebody is here in a rural farmland kind of environment, and then they go to the big city. Or likewise, they start off in the big city, and then in their Act Two, they're going to the rural area. But it might still be within the United States, for instance. That could still be your cultures. But that's rural. So in one way, you go, that's rural, that's urban. Those are different things. You're going into the other world. On the other hand, you're like, but that's still your culture. It's still the United States. Katniss going from her area to the capital. So in one way, that's crossing the boundary into the capital city and everything like that. But on the other hand, it's still her culture. So how do I distinguish between those two, or how do I know what they are? How do I categorize that in the story? Chris, do you want to start off with that? Like, what does it mean to go into the other world?
Well, I had to confront this because I discovered that there is a small category, but a category of stories where there isn't this kind of movement, there isn't this kind of travel to another place, there isn't a distinct geographical, physical difference in two different worlds. You might stay the whole thing in a one-act play, you never leave the room. And so I had to, fit this in and understand, where is the labyrinth there? Where is the special world? And I think you can find it fairly easily, which is something happens often at the call to adventure that changes the conditions in that room or inside someone's head. And so the person that we're following, the culture or the society or the family that we're following has to deal with something that's gone along in a certain way, and maybe it doesn't work quite right and it's uncomfortable. But then something happens, and the body of the story that would normally be geographically different is simply a new set of conditions that sometimes a new person enters, or someone has just decided something that I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm going to say my truth. That's a common thing in plays, and I'm going to take the consequences, and I don't care. And that will shake up the world and change it, even though you don't physically leave the original environment. So that's how I came to deal with this in conventional stories.
Well, and so I'm very similar, in fact. I don't think the special world is nullified by any stretch. In fact, I'm coming to terms with it. So I've studied the hero's journey for so long, and like you, like most people, admire its timeless qualities. And there are stories that it's harder to fit the hero's journey onto, and so you stretch a little bit, or try to, like you said, you find it something distinctive to make it work, or for it to make sense, I guess, from a storytelling standpoint as a special world. So I have all these notes for all these stories that I might view as a heroine's labyrinth story today. However, a hero's journey interpretation can still be put on them. You could still interpret a special world here. For me, it helps. It simply helps to say that here's the special world, to just ask the question, is it a labyrinth? Are you going deeper into your native culture, or are you leaving the native culture? It helps to ask the question, because archetypally, I think the journey is different. I think when you are interacting with familiar people who speak the same language as you, who know all the social rules as you, who may even be better at social rules. You know, they can one-up you. There's social battles that go on all the time, and you might not be adept at handling it, a common problem. And there's secrets. People are hiding things. You have authority figures who the native culture respects. All of these things are archetypally different because you deal with them psychologically at a different place. So when you leave the native culture and you start to experience things that you never have experienced before, like you said, Heath, like if you're in rural Alabama, but then you go to New York, you're still in the native culture. But I would say that you are not. You're in the native culture in the United States, but as a hero or heroine, you're going into a new environment. The rules are different. The people are different. So I think that would still qualify as leaving the native culture, leaving the place that's familiar and going somewhere very different versus pursuing a familiar environment deeper and deeper and learning more and more about it. So the special world still applies. It's useful as a writer to in my opinion, to distinguish an inward journey in the native culture, which is familiarity and possible deceptions and hidden truths, versus leaving the native culture, which may put you out of water, a wilderness survival scenario, possible combat scenario. So it's a little different archetypally, I would say.